Let's skip the slow intro today and jump straight into a tactical after-action report on literally one of the most astonishing, completely disproportionate military massacres in South American history. The date is September 22nd, 1866. We're in a sweltering, muddy swamp in southern Paraguay during the incredibly bloody War of the Triple Alliance. In this explainer, we aren't just telling a story. We're extracting the hard data, reverse engineering a brilliant tactical trap, and identifying the fatal command failures that defined the Battle of Kurupaití. Okay, let's dive into this by looking at the raw numbers, because this was an unbelievably unbalanced battlefield. On one side, you have this massive, overwhelming force of 20,000 Allied troops, invading forces from Brazil and Argentina. And picture this, they're marching forward in these pristine gala uniforms. They actually have military bands playing triumphant marches. Now, against them stands a defending force of exactly 5,000 Paraguayans. Most of these guys are barefoot, wearing ragged clothes, but they are deeply, deeply entrenched in that red dirt. So 20,000 against 5,000. But wait until you hear the devastating casualty ratio we're about to analyze. It's mind-blowing, 185 to 1. By the end of just a single afternoon, those Allied forces suffered around 10,000 casualties, dead and wounded. And the Paraguayan defenders, just 54. Yeah, you heard that right, 54 casualties against 10,000. So the big question is, how on earth does a defending force, completely outgunned and vastly outnumbered, produce such a staggering, almost impossible output? Well, that brings us to Section 1, engineering the trap. To understand that impossible ratio, we really have to dissect the why, focusing right off the bat on the brilliant tactical engineering of the defending commander, Paraguayan General José Eduvigis Díaz. The sheer speed and, frankly, the ingenuity of his execution was staggering. General Díaz knew perfectly well that his 5,000 men would be absolutely crushed in an open field, so he essentially weaponized the terrain overnight. Step 1. Using literally nothing but shovels, muddy terrain, and pure desperation, his men dug a massive 2-kilometer-long trench in a single night. Step 2. They dug a deep pit right in front of it and packed it with sharp stakes. Step 3, they laid down abatis. These are cut, thorny trees that act basically like a natural, impassable barbed wire. And finally, Step 4, they camouflaged the whole shebang perfectly with local grass and branches. From a distance, it just looked like an empty forest. They built this invisible, deadly choke point. It completely proves that desperation and brains can absolutely neutralize expensive military technology. Now, to arm this invisible fortress, General Díaz expertly positioned his artillery. He had 49 cannons, but he didn't just place them randomly, no. He hid them and aimed them precisely at the narrow, muddy bottlenecks where he knew the advancing enemy would inevitably get stuck trying to navigate the swamp and all those thorny trees. The trap was flawlessly set. Moving on to Section 2, critical command failures. Because, an invisible trap really only works if the enemy marches directly into it. So we're not just going to narrate a defeat here. We need to explicitly identify the command errors that actually caused it. And this brilliantly illustrates the direct causality between arrogant leadership and catastrophic loss. Let's walk through this matrix. On the naval side, you have Brazilian Admiral Tamandaré. He was terrified that his heavy ironclad ships would run aground, so he ordered this massive bombardment from way, way too far away. The direct consequence? Well, over 4 hours, 5,000 bombs fell completely harmlessly behind the Paraguayan trenches or just blew up empty dirt. Then, on the ground, Argentine General Bartolomé Mitre compounds the whole disaster. He orders his infantry to advance without conducting any prior reconnaissance whatsoever. The consequence of that? 20,000 soldiers marched blindly into fully intact defenses and an impassable swamp. It really all stems from this one fatal assumption. Picture this. Looking through his binoculars from the absolute safety of his luxury ship, Admiral Tamandaré sees dirt flying from his wildly inaccurate bombardment, smiles, and literally assumes, that's it, we killed them all. He seriously believed there wouldn't be a lizard left alive. This cements a brutal, absolutely crucial tactical lesson. Making assumptions without visual confirmation is fatal. His hubris literally paved the way for a slaughter. Let's get into Section 3. The tactical execution. We're going to set up the exact timeline of how this Allied advance rapidly unraveled into what can only be described as an industrial butchery. Take a look at the chronological escalation of September 22. At 8 a.m., that 4-hour naval bombardment begins, super loud, terrifying, but as we know, tactically useless. By 12 p.m., based entirely on that fatal assumption of success, Telmandares signals the Allied infantry to advance. They march forward so confidently in those pristine parade uniforms, the bands are playing, they're basically expecting to just go collect bodies. But by 4 p.m., the situation has devolved into a total chaotic Allied retreat amidst just catastrophic carnage. In merely 4 hours, the pride of three nations literally sank into the mud. The reality on the ground for those advancing allies was just horrifying. As they marched, the ground, which looked solid, turned into a deep, sucking swamp. Soldiers were sinking up to their knees, their boots completely stuck in the mud, and then they hit those thorny abatis barriers. They couldn't move forward, they were completely bottlenecked at just 50 meters out. And at that exact moment, General Diaz lowers his arm. His 49 cannons unleash a storm of shrapnel, nails, and chains. It acted like a giant scythe just cutting through wheat. Immediately after that, 5,000 rifles fired continuously from that elevated, completely invisible trench. It was a mechanical massacre. The defenders honestly barely even had to aim at the massive crowd of trapped soldiers below them. Bringing us to Section 4, Lessons and Historical Voids. Because the sheer scale of this event really forces us to step back, synthesize the data, and translate these events into explicit tactical takeaways. So the crucial point here is that this battle offers distinctly different takeaways depending on your analytical lens. If you're looking at this from a cadet's perspective, the explicit strategic lesson is that camouflage constructed from local materials can completely neutralize advanced naval technology if you skip basic reconnaissance. For the historians tuning in, you'll note that this single, humiliating defeat was so devastating it completely stalled the War of the Triple Alliance for nearly an entire year. If you're a content creator, your focus is likely on that vivid, incredibly tragic contrast between the bright gala uniforms of the morning and the bloody mud of the afternoon. And for the general public, the ultimate takeaway is pretty clear. Sheer ingenuity and courage can actually overcome overwhelming, heavily funded numbers. However, in this explainer, we adhere to strict analytical standards. We do not hallucinate facts, and that brings us to the strict limits of our historical data. We have to explicitly declare exactly what the sources fail to provide. There are some definitive voids in the ingested historical record. First off, the sources are completely missing the names of the specific commanders leading the 4 Allied columns that marched into that swamp. We know the overall commanders, obviously, but the actual column leaders remain unidentified here. Second, while the sources do state that General Diaz died of an infection months later, they are missing any detailed descriptions of the defense of the Humaytah fortress following his death. We explicitly warn you of these gaps because we only analyze what is strictly verified. We never extrapolate beyond the hard data. And that brings us to the conclusion of our tactical after-action report. The Battle of Kurupaití stands as this brutal, unforgettable monument to the true cost of arrogance. You have a force of 20,000 marching confidently into an absolute meat grinder built by 5,000 desperate men with shovels. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. When exactly does hubris become the deadliest weapon on the battlefield? Think about that single assumption. We killed them all, and the 10,000 casualties it directly produced. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and always keep questioning the data.